So many of our investors are now families that are on an H-1B, and they've been stuck in the EB-2 or EB-3 backlog for years. And they have no clear guideline or time horizon of when they're realistically going to get a permanent green card. Currently, there's over 1 million applicants between the primary applicant and their dependent family members in the EB-2 and EB-3 queue. Many of these families have been in the United States for over a decade, and if they lose their status, they're in a really tough situation.
Hello and welcome to the very first episode of EB-5 Decode with EduFund. My name is Anand, and today we are diving into a topic which is gaining a lot of interest, especially with Indian parents having children and kids studying abroad, especially in the US. I'm talking about EB-5 Immigrant Investor Visa. To help us break it down, I'm joined with Nick from Canam. Canam has been in the industry from 1987. It's been more than 20 years doing investor visas. Nick, thank you for joining us.
Anand, thank you so much for asking us to speak to the EduFund community. We're very happy to be here with you and help educate your community about the EB-5 program.
Nick, thank you for being here. I'm going to get started, Nick. There has been a lot of questions that comes to me every day because we work with a lot of parents and students. And the most common question is, what is EB-5? This is a topic a lot of our family members, our community members are curious about. But apart from curiosity, I think there's a lot of misconception and confusion that exists around the word EB-5 Investor Program.
Sure. Well, at a very high level, the EB-5 program is really a job creation program in the United States. It was started by Congress in the 1990s and allows non-US citizens to make a qualifying investment that must generate at least 10 full-time jobs for U.S. workers. So again, it's really a job creation in the United States to help U.S. workers and stimulate the U.S. economy through foreign investment. The minimum investment amount is $800,000 US, and you need to demonstrate to the U.S. government that that investment generated at least those 10 full-time jobs. The original version of the program was a direct program that allowed entrepreneurs and business owners to start their own business in the United States, and they would directly generate the jobs to get a green card. But the much more popular version of the program is called the Regional Center Program. And the Regional Center Program allows groups like Canam, which is a regional center operator, to take groups of investors, pool their funds, and invest that money into larger scale developments and projects. And it's by investing in these larger scale developments and projects that we are able to facilitate the job creation, because since the projects are so large, it makes it much more feasible for an individual investor to generate the jobs necessary to get a green card.
And why are parents and families considering it every single day?
Because again, with many of the other visa classes, the applicant is really dependent on sponsorship, most commonly from an employer. So if you're a student in the United States, whether you're coming from India or from any part of the world, obviously you're studying in the United States, you're trying to, in many cases, ultimately get a job in the United States. And for those folks, the most common way to get a job is through employer sponsorship. So they have a limited number of jobs they can apply for that require the employer to sponsor their residency in the United States, and they must continue to work for that employer while they remain in the United States. But folks are using EB-5 to give them more options and more opportunities, because through EB-5, you do not require employer sponsorship. You can work for any company you choose. You can start your own business. You don't even have to work. You can just live in the United States.
And since you mentioned jobs, whenever a student applies for F1, which is a student category, and then they go to a typical route, which is H-1B, is there any job security per se in EB-5 investor visa programs, or it has nothing to do with it?
I would say it's not job security, and I guess there's a few different lenses you could look at that through. Yes, there's security that you have a job with a specific employer, but you also have a lot of risk, because if that employer chooses to eliminate that position or have a layoff, then you have no status in the United States and you have to leave the country. EB-5 may not give you the security of a guaranteed job, but it gives you the options and the opportunity to apply for any job you choose.
Talking about the investment amount, right? You started with 800,000 investment, and certainly it might look a very big number to most of the parents and families because for obvious reasons, right? I would love to know, how does this investment amount work? Anything that you could shed light on this investment amount, where does it go?
So let's start with the amount in general. So the minimum U.S. government requirement is $800,000 for an investment in a location designated as a TEA, which stands for Targeted Employment Area. Two types of TEA. One TEA is a high unemployment TEA, which is a project which is located in a part of the country that has greater than 150% of the national average of unemployment. The other type of TEA is a rural TEA, which is a location that has low population. And USCIS and the US government define that as being outside of a major city and technically outside of what they define as an MSA, a metropolitan statistical area. And the minimum investment amount for an investment in one of those locations is $800,000 because it gets you all of the exact same benefits. And for the vast majority of investors in the industry, in addition to working with a regional center, our role in this process is to provide investors with the qualifying projects that will generate the jobs to get them a green card. But they also need to partner with a U.S. immigration attorney, an EB-5 qualified immigration attorney that does a few jobs for the investor.
Right.
So between the legal fees, the administrative fees, and the government filing fees, investors should expect an additional $75,000 to possibly up to $100,000 of additional costs. So all in, the range of costs to make an EB-5 investment is going to be between $875,000 to $900,000 US.
So this 800,000 going to one per project, and you working with thousands of families across the globe for over 35 years. How would you say a good or a risky investment? Because I think that would be a common question for most of the parents out there. They're going to put almost every penny that they have in the accounts to get their son or daughter the dreams to stay in the United. What would you say is a good investment versus a risky investment that you must have seen?
Sure. I mean, certainly get that question a lot. And naturally, you know, all of our human inclination is to have a quick and simple answer. And unfortunately, that's not reality. Risk is a holistic evaluation you need to make based on many data points. Those data points include the quality of the regional center. What is their experience in getting investors their green cards and investing in successful projects that repay the capital? Also, what is all of the financing in a project? When you're making financial evaluations, you want to understand what are all the sources of financing for a project and where does the EB-5 investment sit? How is it structured? What is their repayment priority? Are there other types of financing that may be senior to them? What is the types of protections you have in the project? So those are some of the data points that people need to evaluate there when they're evaluating regional center projects.
Every single day, maximum question around the source of funds that you mentioned that I get is, how do I prove that where the money came from? Because I think most of the parents has this question that what should I prepare when it comes to source of funds? What sort of things that I should keep in mind when applying or starting this process? And what sort of guidance would you give to maybe an average Indian family who's just starting out to get their documents for source of funds?
So step one is certainly work with a qualified EB-5 immigration attorney. That is one of the most crucial steps. I think it's crucial to work with an immigration attorney that has filed many EB-5 applications and has many successful EB-5 applications. Certainly the regional center is familiar with various sources of funds, but an immigration attorney will help an individual investor family identify what funds they have access to and what would be the most appropriate and the most successful for an EB-5 application. And there certainly is a lot of work that goes into it, but people shouldn't be scared or intimidated by that. One of the most crucial things to think about is that it must be all properly documented money. It has to come from documented money. It can't come from cash transactions that have no paper trail. So certainly most commonly income from your employment and your salary and your bonuses. You can use gifts from family and from friends, but the documentation can't be simply that, oh, I received a gift and this is the money that I'm using for my EB-5 investment. The attorney will also need to document, well, how is the money that was gifted generated? So was it gifted from the parents' work? Was it gifted from the parents' investment? And investments are also something that we need to dive deeply into. It's not as simple as that the investors sold the property or sold stocks. USCIS is going to want to see, well, how did you generate the money to acquire that property? How did you generate the money to acquire the stocks? And even for very easy, very quick source of funds, most immigration attorneys need a minimum of 6 weeks to complete the source of funds documentation process, and in many cases even longer. And the regional center can't accept any funds from the investor family until that source of funds work is done.
I know you've touched upon this topic, which is timelines about this, but I want to go a little deeper in this. So I'm going to start with a question. Let's say if a family starts today, when does the child get the green card? And can they live or work during that time in the United States? Can you break down the timelines for me, maybe from today till the time they get the green card?
So generally speaking, the full EB-5 immigration process from the time you make your investment and file the very first application to the time that you actually have a permanent U.S. green card in your hand is most commonly between 6 and 7 years to complete the full process.
Okay.
Now, don't let that time horizon scare you, because there are other steps along the way that happen much more quickly. Mm-hmm. One important starting point is, where is the applicant filing from? If you're filing from outside of the United States, you need to go through what's called the consular process. If you're filing from within the United States, you're going through the concurrent filing process. The very first step for both processes are the same. It's filing the first application. So step one is preparing your source of funds. That can take 6 weeks or more. And it's during that 6-week period where I think is most appropriate to evaluate projects. If you're filing from outside of the United States, you'll file your I-526E petition. Very commonly, that first application can take anywhere from 9 months to 24 months to be approved. Once your application is approved, if you're outside of the United States, you have to schedule a consular interview. And that can depend on how busy your local consulate may be. Sometimes applicants can schedule that interview in 2 to 3 months. Sometimes it's 4 or 5 months. Sometimes it's 6 months or greater. So between waiting for your application to be approved and then waiting for your consular interview to be approved, most commonly people won't be issued the first green card, which is a conditional green card, for about 2 years or longer. Some people get it quickly. I've seen people get it in a year and a half or less, and I'm encouraged by that. But I think our job as your partners to give people realistic expectations. So I think approximately 2 years is a good baseline expectation to actually have a green card in your hand.
Wow, that's fast.
If you're an applicant in the United States, such as a student on an F1 visa, or you're on an H1 visa and you're working for a large company in the United States, when you file the first application, you also have the benefits of applying for a work and a travel authorization immediately. That's called concurrent filing. So you don't need to wait for your I-526E to be approved to get benefits. Once you file the first application, you can immediately apply for what's called an EAD, an employment authorization document, and an advance parole, which is a travel document which allows you to travel freely in and outside of the United States. And most commonly, applicants are getting their EAD in about 4 months. And sometimes the travel authorization comes with the EAD on a combo card, and in some cases it comes a few months later on a separate document. Unfortunately, USCIS is very inconsistent there, and there's no rhyme or reason yet to who's getting the combo card versus who's getting the document separately. But in either case, you're going to have both of these authorizations in under a year. So if you're a student and you're freshman, sophomore, junior year, within 4 months, you have the ability to apply for any internship or any job you choose. You do not require employer sponsorship. So that is a game changer.
Yeah.
That is a very meaningful change for anyone that is looking for a career in the United States. So in both cases, whether you're filing from outside of the United States or from within the United States, it's going to take about 2 years most commonly to actually have a conditional green card. But if you're filing from within the United States, you get very meaningful benefits in the first few months.
Okay.
Then, whether you're filing from outside or inside of the United States, the remaining steps in the process are the same. Once you have your conditional green card, you have a 2-year green card. It has all the rights and privileges of a permanent green card. The only condition is the time horizon.
One of the most common questions that I get is my child eligible? So, for example, if some student is already on their F1 student status, probably working in a nice university out here, most of the question that parents has is, can the student apply for EB-5 program? Can that be a primary applicant, or does it have to be parent? How does that scenario really goes?
No, the student can absolutely be the primary applicant. So it is not required to be a parent to be an EB-5 investor. We can accept students. The program allows minor investors to proceed with EB-5. So it does not have to be the entire family that decides to move their lives over to the United States. So it really depends on the circumstances of the family. In many cases, it can be beneficial because with a single $800,000 investment, an investor, their spouse, and any children under the age of 21 can all get access to a permanent green card in the United States. So if the whole family does want to move to the United States, that is certainly a benefit, but it is absolutely not required. Many of our investors are students, and very commonly they can actually be minors as well. They can be the primary applicant, their parents can gift them funds, and the students or the children can be the primary applicant to proceed with EB-5 immigration benefits.
And is there any age criteria or age eligibility for the student to apply for this? Do they have to be 18 plus?
No, you do not have to be 18. You are certainly allowed to be a minor investor. You have to subscribe and file and sign all documentation properly, but being a minor investor is not an issue.
Okay. And the same minor investor can have additional dependents with them? Like, let's suppose they want to add their parents for that matter.
So that's an important question. The primary applicant can include their spouse and their children.
Okay.
If a child is the primary applicant, they cannot then retroactively add their parents at a later point in time. So it is very important to strategically plan who will be the primary applicant. If the parents do intend to move to the United States, in many cases it may make sense for them to be the primary applicant, so their children are included on their single investment. But if the parents are not really certain they want to move to the United States at all, in many cases, it's more beneficial for the child to be the primary applicant, and the parents need to be comfortable knowing that they will not have any immigration benefits if the child is the primary applicant.
So what are the red flags that parents should watch out for in this case?
So that would be my first red flag. Be aware of the financial considerations. Be cautious of overly optimistic timelines. Be cautious of overly optimistic rates of return. And ultimately, choose the right partners. Like any major decision, choosing the right partner is crucial. From your advisor to your immigration attorney to your regional center. An investor family wants to do this once and do it right. And choosing the right partner that has a long track record of experience and success is really crucial to making a successful EB-5 investment. Also, when you make an EB-5 investment, you should be mindful that that sum of money will be invested into a project, most commonly for 5 to 6 years. And while it's invested, it's illiquid. So you'll not have access to that capital to 5 or 6 years. And another financial consideration, the rates of return on EB-5 investments are very, very low. Most commonly, after the deductions and US taxes, the realized rates of return are less than 0.25%. And at Can-Am, we really feel our role is to make sure we get you your green card and to protect and return your principal.
Taking our conversation ahead, H-1B, right? When we move ahead from F-1, the traditional path for most of the Indian families is apply for a university, you do an F1, you get into H-1B, and then keep waiting, keep hoping that you would get an extension, you would get a chance to stay and work here and probably fulfill your dreams. From your experience, how does EB-5 stack up against this traditional route, which is F1, H-1B, and probably later?
Well, what's really happened now is that traditional route is now a huge part of the EB-5 market. So many of our investors are now families that are on an H-1B, and they've been stuck in the EB-2 or EB-3 backlog for years, and they have no clear guideline or time horizon of when they're realistically going to get a permanent green card. Currently, there's over 1 million applicants between the primary applicant and their dependent family members in the EB-2 and EB-3 queue. So the original applicants came from India or other parts of the world. They've had successful careers here with a company, and their children were born here. And if they lose their status, they're in a really tough situation. So that community has really become a huge part of the EB-5 investor base now, because once you have your work authorization and ultimately your green card, you are no longer dependent on your employer to sponsor you. So that really gives EB-5 investors a safety net and options to pursue different job opportunities. And even within H-1B, even if you love your company, you really have limited flexibility. You have limited flexibility vertically. Your job function is very specific. Your role is very specific. That's what your H-1B is approved for. And horizontally, you have no flexibility. You can't just easily apply for any other job unless that other job will sponsor you. So your options are limited. And certainly in many companies across the United States over the last few years, we all know there's ups and downs in the economy. There have been times where there have been layoffs at major tech companies and other industries. And families are scared. What happens if I lose my job? What happens if I lose my sponsorship? So they're really using EB-5 as a lifeline to really give them and their families more permanent status in the United States.
Nick, and thank you so much for sharing it in detail. I'd love to ask if somebody, any parent, any student who's just starting today about this entire EB-5 immigrant visa program, what should they consider? Where should they start?
Step one is certainly to educate yourself about the program. Educate yourself about what the immigration process is. Educate yourself about what the investment process is. And then you need to make a very personal decision of, is EB-5 right for me and my family? It's a big investment. It's a long process. You can get meaningful benefits very quickly, but you are signing up for at least a 5 to 7 year journey in most cases. So a family needs to decide, is this the right journey for them? And if they do decide that EB-5 is the right path for their family, I really think the very first step they should make is to start working with an immigration attorney. Because for most investor families, the biggest bottleneck in this process before they can start their immigration process is completing their source of funds. For most immigration attorneys, even for a very easy source of funds, it's going to take a minimum of 6 weeks to do the source of funds work, which is a crucial part of the application. In fact, it's the number one reason why applicants are denied, or due to issues with the source or the path of their funds. So I would encourage people to first decide if they want to do EB-5. Then, if they decide it's right for them, immediately start working with an immigration attorney and start working on your source of funds. Also, regarding the funds, in many cases, families still need to liquidate assets. Maybe they need to sell a property. Maybe they need to sell stocks or options or ESOPs or RSUs. Maybe they need to get a loan. Many of our investors are using home equity lines of credit to make these investments. That can take a month or 2 months or several months. So all these things take time and are bottlenecks before you're able to actually proceed in many cases. Then, when I think an investor family has reliable visibility that they're going to be in a position to start and in many cases complete an investment within a 2 to 3 month time horizon, I think that is the right time to start doing real project due diligence. I think naturally a lot of investor families I speak with, they think, oh, the first step is to find the project, then I'll worry about my source of funds. And I understand that logic, but I think it's actually the wrong way to go about it. I think first, make the family decision. Is this really what we want to do? If we do, start working on your funds immediately. And then when you have that reliable visibility that you're going to be in a position to make your investment within a 2 to 3 month window, I think that is the right time to start speaking with regional centers and evaluating projects. And then while your source of funds is in progress, you make your final investing decision so that when your funds are ready, you can then immediately make your investment and file your petition.
I couldn't agree more. I think this program is not just a financial decision that the parents or the families will make, but also a very personal and an emotional decision.
Very much so.
So I would definitely encourage everybody to sit down, have that chat, think as long as you want, whether you want to do this is the right choice for you, what it is, how it works, when do I start, where do I start, and how much money should I put in. Thank you for sharing all the incredible insights, Nick. I'm sure this has been very helpful for everybody who's watching and want to start their journey in EB-5. If you're thinking about long-term options to stay, live, or work in the US, I think EB-5 is a program that you must explore. Just make sure you work with the trusted partner, Nick and Callum team.
Anand, thank you very much for your time as well. And thank you to the EduFund team and the EduFund community. I hope you found it helpful.
If you have any further questions, do not hesitate to comment below. Thank you.